So I would like to say welcome to everybody who is here today. Normally we are on a summer break as MASDER, as we were running for the past 6 years our cafe debate on Saturdays, and we were recording the oral history with some guest speakers. But as Michael showed up, and we wanted to take advantage of this opportunity that he shares his latest work with us. He accepted our invitation and we are here today. So I'm just giving a short bio of Michael. As you know, most of the people here in this way or another know him from the Eastern Mediterranean University years. So he worked at the Department of Archaeology and Art History from 2002 to 2011, and was for several of those years the chair. In that time, he nominated the Walled City of Famagusta for World Monuments Fund, listing twice, 2008 and 2010, and also organized the Paris Conference on Famagusta, which led to the first major publication on the city. Actually, this was the one that Famagusta was listed as one of the endangered sites, wasn't it? Yeah. So in 2011, he moved to Singapore, and using funding from there, conducted several interventions to protect the wall paintings of Famagusta and to develop the digital heritage of the city. This led to 4 more books and several documentary films with Dan Fosham. We are sending our best wishes to Dan as well from here. Yeah. Recently, he submitted the finished manuscript of Beyond Famagusta, Cultural Memory and Historical Imagination, which will be published in 2026, and explores how Famagusta appears in the arts after 1571, especially in poetry, literature, opera, theater, photography, and film. Today's talk is about this forthcoming book. So I'm leaving the floor to Michael. We will have a kind of an hour presentation, and then questions and answers and comments. So I feel like not interrupting your presentation. You do it first, and then we go for the Q&A.
Okay.
Okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah. Please.
Thank you, Sakarya.
I'll just try to switch off that. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's good. Yeah, that's okay? Much better. Yeah. You can sleep better now. Thank you very much, Serdar. Thank you very much, MASDER, for the very warm invitation, and thank you everybody for coming. I realize how busy you all are, and it's an honor actually that you would take time out of your busy day to come and listen to me talking about your city. So this is a presentation about a new book. It was interesting because I didn't realize it would become so big. That's the thing with Famagusta. It keeps telling you new stories. When you think you're finished, another one starts, and you think this is never going to end. And so I thought the book would take 2 or 3 years to write, and in fact it took much, much longer. Because new stories kept appearing. And of course we live in a digital age, and all libraries and archives are now online, which means that in the past you might know that there's a document in Germany or there's a picture in Holland or something like that, but you'd never see it unless you traveled to see it. But now it's one click, and so a researcher really has no excuse for not using the rich archives and resources that the digital age has made possible. So anyway, that's the reason why the book's taking so long. It's a little bit different in that all of these 5 books before have also been about Famagusta, but they're different. I edited those, so I didn't actually write them. I wrote the introductions, but they're all edited collections of studies, mostly to do with the history of Famagusta, or the art history, or the architectural history, or perhaps the cultural heritage. The one on the right was the very first one that came from the Paris conference. I was very pleased with the photograph. A Canadian photographer who was in the music department at EMU, a guy called Shane Fage. Some of you might even remember this. He lay on his back outside the cathedral. People thought there was something wrong with him, thought he was sick. He lay on his back waiting for that bird to take off in the photograph. And when the bird flew away from the cathedral, he took the photo, and I said, please, can I use that for the front cover of the book? And he agreed. The other ones were slightly different. That was, again, the usual sort of Venetian and Lusignan one. This book was about the Ottoman and British eras in Famagusta. And then this one was a different type of study. It was a deep, deep dive into one building, the Armenian Church of Famagusta. So it's like 17 chapters, all on the one little subject of the Armenian Church. That was quite different. And then that one is just about the port, about the maritime history of Famagusta. So all of those were sort of academic. They were all based in Famagusta. But the next book, well, the new book, is about how Famagusta was seen by others. So this new book is really quite different because after 1571 and up to 1878, in the European imagination at least, Famagusta either disappeared or was reinvented. And so in the theatre, in the opera, in poetry, in literature, in photography, in film, and everything else, Famagusta was recreated, sometimes accurately, sometimes not. So, you know, we're familiar with the departure point. We're familiar that in 1571, Famagusta changed hands for 300 years. That's well documented. It's, you know, there's eyewitness accounts to all of that. That's how you can make maps like this. There's eyewitnesses accounts from not just the European sites, but also the Ottoman archives. There's survivors' accounts at the Topkapi Palace. In fact, here is one of them. Oh. There it is. It's a bit slow to load. They were very good about providing 3 of these nice images for the new book. This is the siege of Famagusta, so that you can see it up there. And then there's pure imagination from people who weren't there, but who had heard the stories, and they started to paint or to illustrate books. So this again is Famagusta in its, and you can see it's nothing like Famagusta. It's totally different. It's purely the figment of a European imagination. So that's one thing. The idea then is, in the introduction of the book, is simply to say, look, we know so much about this city up to 1571, and then we know very little. So this is trying to fix that, or to try and think about it. So the first chapter looks at the myths and the martyrs that emerged from it, and of course Othello is the obvious example, because Shakespeare, the story of Othello predates 1571, but Shakespeare's writing Othello is after 1571. So as a work of literature, it's about martyrdom, and it's about the martyrdom of individuals. It's about that rivalry, that warfare that existed at the time between what they called the cross and the crescent. So Famagusta became a symbol of that martyrdom. It became a symbol of the rivalry, shall we say, between cross and crescent. And so Othello is about losing one's soul, but the reason it's set in Famagusta is because here is a city that suffered a similar fate. So that appeared in all sorts of iterations. But what interested me was how, when the stage sets were being created for Othello, or illustrated books were being created, how did European artists imagine Famagusta to be? Because they didn't see it, they never saw it. And they had to completely fictionalize this image. So this is a stage set from London in the 19th century. And this is a similar stage maquette. It's a model for La Scala in Milan for the opera Othello. Othello, well, there was two operas, one by Rossini and one by Verdi. And so this is the stage set for Verdi's Othello. Again, that's in the Italian imagination, 300 years after the siege. That's what they thought Famagusta looked like, or would have looked like. The story of the execution of Bragadino also featured. I mean, this is from an Italian account. Again, if you look at how Famagusta is depicted, it's entirely Italian. It's got nothing to do with the way Famagusta actually is. And then there are Ottoman accounts of the same event. Here it comes. This, I just got this last week from the Topkapı archive. This is the same, well, it's a different depiction of the same event with a description of the same event that's actually quite similar between Ottoman and Italian accounts. And then as we get away from memory, as anyone who knew Famagusta died and was replaced by people who knew nothing about Famagusta except the stories and the myths, you get pure invention. So I mean, this is sunny, heavenly paradise that is Cyprus. There's Lefkosia, there's Famagusta. And actually they're not bad, because Lefkosia does look like that and Famagusta does look like that, so it's not complete imagination. And then of course the story of Caterina Cornaro, that's always going to be of interest to writers or to theatre productions. So I don't know how many operas there are, it's about 12 or 13. Mostly from Germany, but also from the United States. This one's from England, The Daughter of St. Mark, and again, there's the old stage set for, again, this is how they, in fact, if you look carefully, you'll see that they saw that the palace directly went down to the sea. There's a boat underneath that arch. And even up until the 20th century, this is a rather modern depiction of Famagusta from the Russian ballet. Bakst was the artist of this. There was an eccentric Italian, he went on to become a sort of minor dictator, a guy called Gabriele D'Annunzio. And he wrote a full play, which was then turned into an opera called La Pisanella, which is all set completely in Famagusta. And this was the stage set for it. So at the end of chapter 1, the point was simply to say European presence may have left Famagusta in 1571, more or less, but that didn't stop the imagination. And those were some examples of how the city survived in imagination. Then there's the whole question, and as the 19th century comes along, as to, well, the future of Cyprus is, in the 1860s or 50s, is going to be contested. Geographically, it's in an important area of the Mediterranean. It was definitely going to be of interest, certainly to the French, possibly to the Germans, definitely to the English. And so Famagusta and its heritage and its history was used to make a case for imperialism. The French had a very, very strong case in that you know Famagusta, you know the architecture, it's all Lucinian, not all. A lot of it's Lucinian period heritage. it doesn't seem unusual for French people to want to come back. And that case was definitely made. The principal historian, and in fact the scholarship of Famagusta largely belongs to the French, more so than the English. This is Camille Onlard, who wrote the definitive medieval and Renaissance history of the city. That's him standing in front of the cathedral back in the 1890s. The British were intrigued, not so much their heritage. You know, you could make a claim maybe with Othello because that's Shakespeare. But I mean, the architecture and so on is predominantly Gothic, it's predominantly French. So in the British imagination, it was more a city of contemplation rather than a historical lineage. So some nice old photos of, well not photos, some nice old images appeared in 1878 in Paris and in London about, well, the nature of imperialism is that people don't normally vote for it. You simply are informed that the government has made a decision and Cyprus now falls under the administration of Britain. And then people in Britain are saying, well, where's Cyprus? Or what is Cyprus? Or I've heard of it, but I know nothing about it. So art and artists are going to be needed to inform people about the new acquisition, the new country that's now under their administration. So here we have Scottish soldiers marching into the square. This is from the Illustrated London News in 1878, and children running out to meet them, and the familiar scene, which hasn't changed very much, in the square in Famagusta. You also got architects who were amazed by the fact that because from 1571 to 1878, the French architecture wasn't really changed. It was modified a little bit, you know, to convert a cathedral to a mosque. But there was no Enlightenment, there was no Baroque, there was no Rococo, there was no Renaissance. There was nothing. European medieval architecture is sometimes hard to understand because there's so many later additions added to it that you can't get back to the original. But what British and French architects were noticing that in Famagusta, it's the original. And so to come here and to see a building that hadn't been touched since 1571 is kind of like a bubble. It's like a time capsule. And so it became a real subject of interest for architects. It also became a really romantic place in people's imaginations. You know, here's this city that had once been something very, very special, and now it's like this. Glass half full, glass half empty. How do you think about that? What do you feel about that? For sure it's a place for contemplation. For sure it's a place of silence. It's a place to reflect on, you know, the nature of humanity and the coming and going of empires and so on. So artists, watercolorists like this, who were allowed into Ottoman Famagusta, started to produce paintings of it. And then there's the whole question of what do we do with it? You know, once you've inherited something, and Famagusta is now under British administration, but then, okay, that's a problem in some ways, because on the one hand, you've just inherited an enormous responsibility to protect something, or do you? I mean, there were proposals to just demolish, certainly the seawall. There was never much money for Cyprus and for heritage. So the people who, this is George Jeffrey, that's his photograph. He was always working with a bad budget. So it's how do you get the most work done for the least money possible? And they also knew that other people would be watching them. They knew the French would be watching. Because in some ways the French are saying, well, We would have happily inherited Cyprus. You got it. But what are you going to do to protect our heritage there? So there was quite a lot of pressure to do things right. There was also the desire to get the economy going. So the city had to start functioning again. It was depopulated, a population of about 300 or 350 people. It had to get moving again, and that involves building roads and railways and developing the port and getting industry to start again. Typically, well, I don't know, I'll make no comment, but the administration also put in a tennis court in the palace and made a golf course around the walls of the city, going from bastion to bastion, or in this case you can see just inside. See, there they are, playing golf in the 1930s. It appeared on postage stamps, of course, on lots of them. And then, as we're all aware, in 1960, that came to an end, and as he left Famagusta in 1960, his departure speech it included the lines from Othello. So cultural heritage had made it all the way through to the end of imperial rule. Okay, third thing. It's not just about buildings and heritage and art and things. It's about people. And it always seemed to me that Famagusta had some really interesting characters, whose some people are well known, like Nama Kemal, but others like Kata Giorgiani are virtually unknown. In fact, totally unknown. So I did a chapter on that. One of the other things that the British inherited when they got Cyprus in 1878 was a lot of political prisoners, and they didn't know what to do with them. What do you do with exiles? Do you send them back? But to where? Do you keep them in prison? For what? Do you release them? Are they dangerous? So, you know, it's another problem. And how you treat prisoners really, really matters. The British made a bad mistake here in the very first year of their administration, where they imprisoned 2 Greek Cypriot priests for theft and disobedience and chopping wood, actually. And because the prison laws, the new British prison laws, said that everyone has to have their head shaved and be clean shaven because of lice, because of, you know, for health reasons. And you can't do that to an Orthodox priest. You can't. So it actually ended up in Parliament saying, okay, we have to be more careful about this. If we have any intention of winning the hearts and minds of the people who live in Famagusta, we've got to know these things. We've got to handle it sensitively. And so, so I was surprised that cutting 2 people's beards ended up in the Houses of Parliament in London, and it did. There was Nama Kemal, which we know about. There was also Sufi Azel. I don't know if you've been up into his house and his bedroom. It's a little mini museum now, actually, where I was surprised to come across a photograph of him standing with Winston Churchill. Who knew? And right there's another story. Why did Sufi Azel and Winston Churchill meet in 1907? There's images of his funeral coming out of the gate in Famagusta. And then there's also a Greek Cypriot artist, Georgiou. I've been communicating with his niece in London. This is from his little chapel called Santa Silencio, which is in the Queen's Palace in the center of the city. It was a restaurant. Is it still a restaurant?
It's closed.
It's closed.
Yeah.
In the corner there's a little chapel that he built. It's not an old chapel. It's made with old stones, but it's not an old chapel. And then he decorated the inside of it. And it's modernism. It's you know, the 1930s, 1940s. And he knew all the people in London, the modern artists in London. In fact, Gertrude Stein, for example, was a friend. And that Don Quixote is just a photograph taken through the window of the Blue Bungalow in Varosha, where that was his summer house. So a lot of his works are still on the walls there. Well, they're painted on the walls. But there's another story right there. There's the story of William Dreghorn, a very committed, eccentric Englishman who I never knew. He died in 2001. I arrived in Famagusta in 2002, so I missed him by a year. But he left behind a lot of watercolors, a lot of writing, some of which is in the archive in Cardinia. So I've used that in the book. Okay, photography. They say the camera never lies, and that was probably true once. Now the camera very rarely tells the truth. But the first photograph of Famagusta that can be identified is in France by a guy called Louis Leclerc, taken in 1859. So this is actually inside Ottoman Famagusta, before the whole conversion process began in 1878. The National Library of France has a wonderful policy of making their digital archives free. So anyone you can do it from your seat here on your telephone. If you want to see hundreds upon hundreds of photographs of Ottoman Famagusta or British Famagusta, their library, you just keep downloading, and it's the future, I think, of archives. There's another one called the Wellcome Trust in London, which does the same. Of course, as you can imagine, for French and British and Germans, seeing inside Famagusta after 300 years was going to be interesting, not just for heritage, but for intangible heritage. Going to be interested to hear the people speaking and to listen to their music and to see their costumes. This was actually done by an Ottoman company based in Istanbul. They were interested in the costumes of Famagusta. And so you get records being made where people are basically trying to catch up. This was taken by a Scottish photographer, John Thompson. Actually, all his negatives are in the Wellcome Trust in London, and they're all free access, so you can see those for yourself. Thompson, I think his photographs are beautiful. He was also working in Singapore, actually. I think his photographs are beautiful, but the modern interpretation of the image isn't just that you enjoy the aesthetics of a picture. It's that it was 1878, a record is being made of how the British Empire inherited Cyprus. And it's a visual record. And from this point on, we can measure change, or measure, if you consider it to be improvement. So it gives you the chance to do a before and an after comparison. This is the before photographs. And maybe in 50 years' time, we'll come back and do after photographs, and you'll see, on the whole, was the British presence in Cyprus a good thing or a bad thing? That's the idea. So these early pictures are designed to do that. The Victoria and Albert Museum in London, also everything's free. They have a collection of images from Famagusta. This was taken from George Jeffrey's little museum it's the Pygmalion studio now in the centre of the city. As excavations began, and of course there were people. Lovely to look at a bustling market. Just off shop, there's a dog having a little nap in the corner, and it's a picture that's absolutely full of life, but of actual people doing actual things. This is again from France. And then, of course, there's the Mugatcap archive, which still hasn't been scanned digitally, which really it should. 8,500 images, individually catalogued. The negatives survive, not just the not these things, but the actual negatives are all, they've survived. And there's one negative, one envelope, and then Mugatkat typed on the front of the envelope the time the photograph was taken, the place. So it's a great archive, and it's in Lefkosha. And it would be a wonderful thing if one day that could be put online, like all these other collections I'm talking about. The important thing about the Mugatkap archive, it's 26 years of photographs, but it's of society.